And check this out, US population 1903, when my grandpa was born, 80 million. Now he was born in London, but still conceptually, I mean, you think about it's basically 1/4 as many people. It means even a town like New York seems like more of a neighborhood. So you think about all these changes and how rapidly things are changing, and what you expect inflation-wise, and so on and so forth. And the weird thing now is the inflation we have now is being driven by a lack of supply, not a surplus of demand. I mean, yes, in some ways, demand has swung back, but, and this will take us right to the EIA report, it's not that demand is actually higher. Petroleum status report. So we're not using, per se, a lot more gasoline. Now we're using more than last year. We're using more products. So product supplied last year was 18.7. Product supplied this year 20.9. We are exporting 3.5 million barrels per day. Let me make that bigger. So we're exporting 3.5 million barrels per day. Now that means that in 7 days, we're exporting 24.5 million barrels. That's more than we use, a lot more than we use in 1 day. That is our export. So 1 out of 7 of our days is being exported of petroleum products. So when you see this product supplied has gone up from 18.7 to 20.9, it's up 3.2. That's less than what we export. And what we export has gone up from 2 to 3.4 in a year. So so now if that went from 2 to 3.4, that's 1.4. So and the total increase here is 20.9 minus 18.7, 2.2. So 1.4 of 2.2 million products supplied is not US consumption that's gone up. It's that our refineries are exporting 1.4 million barrels a day, 1.4 times 7. So 10 million barrels a week are being consumed by US refineries and being shipped out of America to other countries for their consumption. Now, there's nothing wrong with that conceptually, but you have to understand when people start bullshitting you about supply and US demand and our consumption is going up, it's all crap. That's not true at all. Our consumption has barely moved from here, 2.2, remember 1.4 is the increase, so 800,000. So since we were locked down and shut down a year ago, we're using 800,000 barrels a day more oil. This in no way, shape, or form has anything to do with the build and supply, because of the drawdown of oil, make sure it's the right week, March 18th, yeah. Is that right? Yeah, because it would be the 25th for the next week. Okay, so for March 18th, these dates vary. They vary a lot. Like March 18th is what? It's not Friday, it's Saturday, is it? Oh yeah, March 18th is Friday. Okay, so this always seems weird. So as of March 18th, which it was a Friday apparently, oil inventories decreased by 2.5 million barrels. 2.5 million barrels. We're exporting 1.4 million a day. And for a week, it went down 2.5 million barrels. This is bullshit. And it drives me nuts to see these idiots on TV with their bullshit theories and their bullshit justifications for stuff which is completely wrong. It's so freaking annoying. You gotta understand what's happening. Okay, the petroleum industry is purposely creating this artificial shortage. They're taking advantage of the war, and they're taking advantage of relaxed export restrictions. We used to not be allowed to do this, but now they relax those standards under Trump, and they've been going crazy ever since with the exports. And now we're exporting 3.4. We export more oil. Here, I'll show you. Okay, don't want to see that. It's very depressing. World's largest oil exporters. Okay, how about the amount? There you go. Great. Okay, here you go. Iraq, the third largest producer of oil on the planet, exports 3.4 million barrels of oil a day. Canada exports 3 million barrels a day. Iran 2.7, UAE 2.4, Russia 4.6. You know, these are the numbers. So we are exporting 3.4, 3.5 million a day. We are third. We export as much petroleum product as Iraq exports oil. And by the way, we're the only country that really does this, because we have a lot of excess refining capacity from the days when we used to use a lot more oil. Once upon a time, we used a lot more oil internally because our cars got way worse mileage, and we were much less frugal about our energy consumption. As we become more frugal, we have all these refineries sitting around that have excess capacity. And so, and they now use that excess capacity to send oil out of the country. And one way or another, it's our oil. I mean, well, you know, but the funny, you know, we're importing it. We import 3 million barrels a day that we buy from other countries. But you know what's funny? We don't need it. If we didn't export, we wouldn't need to import. We buy the oil, we turn it into refined product, we sell it overseas. Profits for the refineries, great. But drives the cost up for Americans. So the profits the refineries make by doing this turnaround, this is why it used to be illegal. The profits the refineries make, you know, and I thought they would fix this under Biden, but they're just letting it go. And now, of course, with the Russia thing, you know, hard to crack down on stuff. But they should have done something about it a year or so ago. So basically, we're creating a shortage by sending the oil out of the country. We're creating demand. So all this bullshit you hear about, we need to do more drilling and we're not meeting our capacity and blah, blah, blah. It's all crap. Stop exporting the oil and you're done. But if we stop exporting the oil, of course, the countries we supply with refined product would go crazy, because that's a lot of frickin' refined product. That's as much refined product as the third largest producer of oil in the world. So when they tell you all these horrible things that will happen if Russia stops pumping or something like that, think about what this is. It's the same thing. We're just going to stop sending gasoline, stop sending other crude oil, so on and so forth. So another thing you want to look at, have we been using the strategic petroleum reserve? We have, but not that much. We used 4 million barrels from our strategic petroleum reserve. So 575 to 571. And that's covering. So we still have, still have quite a lot, but last year we had 637. So we've been drawing that thing down bit by bit. So you do want to meet domestic demand, but when the reality is, and again, we go back to this number, it's 24 million barrels a week. This is how much was drawn down in a week from the strategic reserve, 4 million barrels. So all we have to do is look out for number one. You know how so if we reelect Trump, Mr. Look out for number one, this is something you would think he'd be behind. Stop sending out petroleum products to other countries. Screw those guys. Let them deal with the bullshit, and we will have all the oil we need to meet our domestic demand. and we won't need to draw down the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's the other thing. We're actually drawing down. We've drawn down, well, it's not that much. It's 10%. We've drawn down 10% of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve over the past year to support other countries, to sell refined products. So we're drawing down our Strategic Petroleum Reserve in order to sell oil to other countries, sell petroleum. So to make money for the refiners, we're drawing down our Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It's so wrong on so many levels. Just incredibly ridiculous bullshit that goes on in this country. And I would talk about it, you know, I should go and talk about that on TV, except they won't let you. That's the thing. You start talking about things like that, and they're always like, I swear, could they pre-interview you on what you're going to say and so on and so forth? You can't just get on there. Or if you want it to be the last time you're on, you can do it. But if you know, they ask you what you're going to say. And when you start saying stuff like this and try to explain like the hypocrisy of the system and the bullshit of the capitalism, they go crazy. They're like, we can't do that. We can't put that on. We have sponsors. So last year, $61. This year, $104. That's sad. And it's back to 113 today anyway. So a week or so ago it was 104. Now it's back to 113. And gasoline was 286, and now it's 429. But the funny thing about gasoline, it wasn't that cheap last year either, was it? It was still 3 something a gallon. Now it's 4 something a gallon. So frankly, I'd say if anything, the refineries must be hurting because well, it's a crack spread, isn't it? So, in other words, there's 42 gallons in a barrel. Now, if you want to be really realistic about it, you only get 19 gallons of actual gasoline out of a barrel of oil. The rest is, you know, when you distill it or break it up, right? Only 19 out of 42. So half the barrel basically is gasoline. And the rest becomes they use the leftover stuff to make other things. So in the refining process, the amount of gasoline you can get out of a thing works out to about 19 things. But it doesn't matter because we sell gasoline by the barrel. Here it is, gasoline by the barrel, 8.8 million. And again, products supplied 8.8 million barrels of gasoline. Product supply total. Well, we talked about that already. So notice that barely has changed. It does not in any way, shape, or form reflect the numbers that they're trying to sell us and say how demand is increasing. So basically, very, very little change of gasoline supplied, yet gasoline has gone up. Well, it's a little weird, isn't it, right? And now how much has oil gone up? So going back to this, so let's just divide by 42, right? So 61.43 divided by 42, because obviously they're selling what I'm saying is they're selling all the stuff from the barrel. It's just different stuff, but we'll just call it 42 gallons per barrel. So that's $1.46 per gallon. Now 104.69 divided by 42 is 249. So it was 106. So it's a lot more. It's $1.43 more per gallon. That is a and so it's $1. The cost is $1.43, and basically gasoline has gone up $1.43 retail. See, 140 would be it's less than $1.43. So you think the refiners are doing well, but they're not doing well because it's about how much should the oil cost them and how much do they get to sell the gasoline for on that oil. So you can't really blame the refiners other than the fact that they're exporting all the other oil, but you can't really blame the refiners. They're just passing along the cost of the increased price of oil. But the thing about the oil is, this goes back to that though, the thing about the oil is if we didn't export if we didn't export 24 million barrels of oil a week, then we wouldn't need to import the oil, and we would have a surplus of oil. We would have if we didn't export this, we would have 21 million barrels of oil per week building up in this country. If we didn't sell it to foreign countries, we'd have a surplus, and you'd see it. And that's the thing, they don't want you to see it. If you saw this, if you had these, if every week the API reports had another 21 million barrels, and if you saw these numbers jumping 21 million, it's a week, don't forget, you would add 1 billion. We'd be up 1 billion from last year at 20 million a week. We'd have oil falling out. You'd be driving on the highway and there'd be oil barrels lined at the side of the road. They'd have nowhere else to put them. They would just have to put them along the highway and hope somebody wants them at some point. That's the reality. But we solve that problem by shipping 3 million barrels out of the country as fast as we can. And that keeps the refiners humming. VLO being our favorite refiner. See, and they're doing okay, but they're not, you'd think they'd be doing fantastic, right? But they're not really doing better than they were back in 2020. Or even in 2021, when oil was, look how much cheaper oil was. Oil was in March of last year with those prices. And that's, like I said, they're not really benefiting like you would think from this, because they only make their money on what they call the crack spread. The crack spread is the cost of oil when you crack the barrel open. There's some market determination for that. In other words, they officially pay for the oil when they open the barrel, not when it sits. And that's a whole weird pricing model they have in the oil industry. But so the crack spread, they open the barrel, and the difference between that spread of the cost of the oil versus what they then refine it into and what they charge for the gasoline is what they call the crack spread. And that's what matters to the refiners. So generally what happens is when the price of oil is falling, which is counterintuitive, when oil starts falling, it'll generally fall faster. And you've all noticed this when you go to fill up your car. Oil prices come down a lot faster than gasoline prices. Gasoline prices are sticky at the pump. And obviously that's because the local gas station manager doesn't want to turn it over. Also, though, the price that they're paying for gasoline is based on the gasoline that they pay for when it's put into their tanks in the ground. So if they buy a month's worth of, if the gasoline station has a truck come once a month to fill up their tanks, they can't change the price and lower it just because the price went down on Wall Street. That doesn't help them. They already paid for a tank full of gas, a tanker truck full of gas to be in their gas station. And until that all gets used up, they won't get new pricing. And that's why sometimes you see these sad little gas stations that don't do much business, and they have really weird. It's never too low. As soon as that's the thing. Every day that it can be marked up, they'll mark it up. But as soon as when it comes down, they're very slow to bring out the magic marker and change their prices. But it's also, there's a business reason for that, because they want to mark it up and make a profit. And if they bought it cheaply, then good for them. So they'll keep up pace marking it up. But if they did buy an expensive tank of gas, because these guys are not geniuses at timing the market, if they bought an expensive tank of gas and it goes in the ground and it takes a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks for it to drain out, then they're going to keep charging that high price until it's gone. But meanwhile, the busier stations might change their price every 2 days. And that means that if the prices drop rapidly, it could be reflected at the busier stations. I mean, there was a point, was it last year or the year before? So one of the last year or the year before, the price of oil went negative for a day. And there was no point in which anybody was charging negative for gasoline. They weren't calling you over to the gas station and saying, hey, oh, here it was, 2020. So what day is this? They're not very exact with their dates, are they? It just says the month. Anyway, so whatever, sometime in April of 2020, we had that one day when the futures went negative for a bit. And certainly I never went to a gas station where they said, we'll pay you to fill up. Please come and take our gas away. Restart, snooze. That's from, I did that last week too, didn't I? Bad boy. What else? All right, let's see if we have any questions. Nope, no questions. I can just keep rambling. Excellent. What else? Let's see if we're done with this. So anyway, you got to understand the dynamics of these things, because it is all a load of bullshit. But that's why when you see these people start projecting like, oh, Chevron's going to do this and Exxon will do that, and they're drilling and blah, blah, blah. And that, by the way, there's a lot of people who've been saying, why, if this is all true, then why are the oil companies not drilling more? Well, it's because it's not true. It's not true because in reality, we are not doing this for U.S. consumption. Therefore, for a oil company to do a $10 billion project where they open up a new reserve of oil and start pumping drills all over the place and build roads and set up infrastructure, it's going to take them 2 or 3 years to get it going, or maybe build, or God forbid, a pipeline, right? That's that's a non-starter. But to expect the oil companies to spend all this money, and don't forget, steel's really expensive right now, labor's really expensive right now. So to start a project to drill more oil anywhere is crazy expensive, and you're paying, the market prices are really high. And the reality is that 5 years from now, there's probably going to be even less demand than there is now. So unless the well that you're drilling is extremely economically feasible at a normal price, at $50, $60, you really should, it's a suicide mission to do it. You're going to spend billions of dollars and you could lose your ass. So no, oil companies aren't running out and drilling. And as Biden's press secretary said, somebody had asked a similar question at the press conference, and she said, we have 9,000 permits out there. We have 9,000 approved permits that nobody's drilling, because nobody believes this is going to last. This pricing isn't going to last. And what's going to happen over the next 10 years, right? And if you're drilling wells and so on and so forth, you've got to have a 10-year life cycle. Over the next 10 years, what's going to happen? Well, several things. Car fuel efficiency is going to become much more efficient, which means as the entire fleet of cars turns over, let me see, CAFE standards 2025, okay. Images. We have to see it on a chart. But I need to see something at least was done in the last tools. Time, past month, dare we hope. Okay, close enough. No, that doesn't. Nope, past month is not going to work. Past year. Come on, somebody. Vehicle fuel economy, greenhouse gas. What the frick? It better be bigger. There you go. Updated March 14th. Fantastic. Okay, great. Plus, 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 and more pluses. All right. So where are we? Okay, here we go. So passenger cars and light trucks, where are we now? We are right now at 2020, and achieved, solid lines are achieved. So we are currently at 40 miles per gallon average for passenger cars, and we are at almost 30 miles a gallon average for trucks. Now that compares 20 years ago, before we started caring, right? We were at 20, so we are now at 30, and we were at 30, and now we're at 40. Okay, so what happens when you go from, let's just worry about the cars. So the cars go from 30 to 40, right? That means that if you used originally 20 gallons of gas to go 600 miles, right, at 30, you would now use 15 gallons of gas to go 600 miles at 40 miles a gallon. Very simple, right? So you're using 25% less gas to do the same thing. So our population isn't growing very much, and there's not an excess need to take trips, right? So those are out the window. Now, factor in now, another thing that's going to happen is that we don't work anymore at an office. We don't commute to work anymore. Not everybody, but a lot of people, and this was never forecast by anybody. Nobody ever said, oh yeah, and people aren't going to go to work anymore. No, that's a new thing. And there's a lot of companies, I would say more than 10%, less than 20% of all jobs are going to be permanently remote. That companies are now saying, okay, you know what, we can't. Because for the company, first of all, it saves them on, they can actually pay their employees a little bit less because the employees really want to work at home. And the company doesn't have to buy an office space. You know, and if you're in Manhattan, it's $1,000 a foot per year for Manhattan office space. So if you are in a 10 by 10 cubicle, right, in Manhattan, that's 100 feet. So it costs somebody $100,000 to put you in a 10 by 10 space in Manhattan per year. You know, it's a joke, right? Because they don't pay you well, they might, but they don't pay you $100,000 if you're like a regular worker in Manhattan, but they'll spend $100,000 on the space you're in. So from the company's point of view, of course, if you can work at home, work at home. Now that they're getting used to the idea that it's not unproductive to have people working at home, they're starting to rethink their need for space. So there's that. Then don't forget parking spaces in other places. You need parking spaces. You need support staff for the people in the office and HR. You know, you lower your HR issues, you lower your support issues. There'll be other stuff like different kind of training and things you have to do remotely, hooking people up with connections and internet and computers. But on the whole, it certainly is a net benefit for the companies as well. If you can pick the people who can work remotely, you know, then do that. I did that. We had a data company in New Jersey in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and I had people working at home then. I was just like, I'm like, if you don't need to come to the office, don't come to the office. You know, because we had even then with crappy modems, 2400 baud modems, which I can't even imagine how anything actually worked with that. These days, the amount of code that has to go through a pipe. If you tried to do something with those modems, you'd still be waiting now from 1985 to try to open up a screen. But back then we managed. And but anyway, so you know, it was apparent to me from the beginning that it was great. You know, if I didn't have to give someone a desk, and I didn't have to support them, and I didn't have to pay for their help, you know, with their commutes and so on and so forth, it was all great. Anyway, so in this amount of time, since 2020 years, we've done 10%. Our plan, which is proposed now, is to get to 50 miles per gallon. So it's basically another 25% cut of fuel consumption by 2026. Even if we don't hit it, you're talking about way faster than we did the last conversion. And here also the same thing on light trucks. And then also heavy trucks now are going to start getting a better fuel consumption as well. So if we actually do this by 2026, that's going to cut another 20, and that's, you know, a few years. So you're talking about the next 4 years, we're going to knock off as much fuel consumption as we knocked off in the 20 previous years. So no amount of population growth is going to make up for that. And if you couple that with a lower total amount of driving, that's going to change things a lot. And wait till we have drone delivery and things like that. All of a sudden, you're knocking out another big segment of driving, another delivery segment of driving. So what do we need? We need battery advances and technological battery advances. We need 5G to actually work. What the hell happened to that? But these are converging things that are going to decrease demand. So to sit there and add capacity to your oil drilling and to make more oil for what? Because 10 years from now, you're going to have the electrics are going to kick in. And once the electrics kick in, this thing will go like that. The average, because electric is zero. So as you start getting more and more electric cars, it's going to go like this. And so if we're using 20 million barrels a day now of oil, we're not going to go down to 15 because not everything we do is gasoline. But let's say we go down to 18 in 4 years. Then we drop another couple of. The next will be down to 18, 16. So at that point, in 10 years or less, we have 20% less need for oil, less need for gasoline, and that's going to go for the countries we export to too. It's not like you're going to make it up by exporting, because every country's doing this. You know, in Asia, everybody's getting on bikes. Everybody's got electric bikes now and scooters and things like that. They're not into the driving thing at all, which is not good for the auto industry. But like I said, well, like I almost said, I think I lost the train on that. It was an off topic at the time, but it actually mattered. So rewinding back to the beginning of the conversation, you know, from my grandfather's point of view in 1903, and from that thing I was talking about with WrestleMania, yes, that's when I said it was WrestleMania. This is why we have cities, because there was a time when a person who wanted broadcast equipment would have to go to a broadcast major studio in New York to get the broadcast equipment, because nobody else would have it. It's not like you can go down to Radio Shack and get a couple of parts, or Best Buy. You know, broadcast equipment was serious stuff that you would only get from somebody who had a radio station, a TV station, or something like that. And so all the artists and entertainers would converge in a city where it was possible to go and share the equipment. And the same thing goes for concerts and venues and so on and so forth. You know, there's certain things that cities could do because they were the only ones that had what is the word? The mass, whatever. There's a word for this, but I can't think of it. Anyway, they're the only ones that have the massive demand, or the enough reason to have these things in one place. But now, think about what's happening. People aren't commuting. The city's going to start falling apart. There's going to be a big transition, and you know, I think we'll have to see what happens. Cities have to reinvent themselves. New York has this problem big time. Wall Street is like a freaking graveyard right now. It's still 90% empty. A lot of Manhattan is very empty. You go down streets and there's 2 out of 3 storefronts are empty, boarded up or empty. And I mean main streets in Manhattan where it used to be hustle bustle. You see a street. I saw somebody had a thing at Times Square. Times Square, then and now, COVID. 5 days ago. See, that's because it's interesting. If you're in, especially if you're in New Yorker like me, it's really, oh, come on. Oh yeah. Which is which? I mean, what do you? There's no well, I guess we can assume. Okay, but oh my God, why does that constantly have to be blowing things up? Okay, go away, mister. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about, though. Okay, so Fulton Center Station. I don't know. It's no context for time today, but you can see it's kind of the same. Look at this. Look at people. No people. This is freaking Times Square. I don't care what time of day that is. Wall Street. Oh, that's what I talk about, Wall Street. Look at freaking Wall Street. And let's give them the credit that this is basically the same time of day kind of thing. It's certainly the same block. And oh, look how they cleaned up that building though. It's nicely took the time to like resurface. Oh, look, okay, yeah. Brookfield Place, which is a lovely place to hang out and eat, right? Look at this. It's horrifying. In fact, they took away the benches. They don't want people eating there anymore. I guess that's probably a COVID congregation thing. 42nd Street. 42nd Street. This is 311. Grand Central Terminal. Grand Central Terminal. This is where every freaking train goes. The G train. Oh, that's incredible. Look at that. Wow. Anyway, so the point being, you're seeing 2 full years. Once now life is returning to something normal. Store for you, normal had become. Actually, these are going the other way. Haha. It's still really super empty. But these are not. This is actually, this must be the 2020. They're trying to show how it's getting back to normal. This is not back to normal. That's how bad it was. Now I'm looking at the dates now. It's 3/22/2020. So this is what they're calling back to normal, but it's all still said. Wall Street's actually, that's way better for Wall Street. That's normal for Wall Street, pretty much. Oh, I see. So they put the benches back. Well, see, my whole plan is shot on that because they go in the opposite direction. But still, this is 42nd Street. This makes no sense. There can't be parking spaces on 42nd Street. Not only some, there's lots of parking spaces on 42nd Street. There's no buses in the bus lane. It's weird. There's taxis in the bus lane. It says bus only. It says it right there. I'm like, did they change the rules? Like, no, it says bus only. Actually, it says only bus. I always get confused by that. Anyway, so this is Grand Central Station. The G train's got people on it again, though. That's good. What is this? Oh, that's scary. These were dead people piled up at the funeral home. Now they got seats again. They got the seats. But Grand Central Station is usually jam-packed. Well, that's cool. Staten Island Ferry. But there shouldn't be seats on the Staten Island Ferry. I think those things say no seating. Before and after photos. Anyway, point being though, because I get reports from my kids about this stuff. So April 10th, Times Square is now empty. So when is the date of this one? Oh, this is April 10th. So, oh, okay, there you go. That's a good one. That's what Times Square should look like. This is from, well, who knows? This is before the pandemic. But that is normal Times Square. Like you can't see through the people. There you go. These are good before pictures. That is normal. Well, that's Times Square too, but that's normal. Forget that. That's normal. I don't think but there is no normal anymore. That's the thing. So what's going to happen to the city? What's going to happen to a lot of cities? They have to change, but change into what? And usually cities will adapt over time. London used to be one thing, now it's another thing. New York used to be have meadows. In fact, in Central Park, there's a thing called Sheep's Meadow, which actually literally used to be where people would leave their sheep to graze. That was why it's called Sheep's Meadow. If you were a New Yorker and you had sheep, you would bring your sheep over to Sheep's Meadow, and they would sit there and mow the grass and keep the park looking nice. The thing is, so it changes over time, and the farms left Manhattan, and then Manhattan was a place for beautiful homes and all these things, and then they got changed over, and it became more. It became industrial for a while. Manhattan was an industrial center for a little while. Then they shoved all the industries out and put in office buildings, and the office buildings turned into apartments and so on and so forth. So yeah, but these are over decades of time. during the in-between cycles, you can have some very, very big hardships, and especially when you start losing your tax base, and this is a big problem in New York. But if you think about it, the way New York is structured is there are, let me see, I'm gonna make it a guess. How many restaurants do I think are in Manhattan? 10. I'm going to say 4,000. How many? Well, depends what you count as a restaurant. That's the problem in Manhattan. Because, I mean, if you can't count every little pizza place, 6,000. Yeah, see. It's how many menus are listed for restaurants on menu pages. Yelp has reviews for 10,000 restaurants. But I don't know if you call a little chain, like a little pizza place a restaurant. That's, that would change things. There's a lot of stands. There's a lot of little hole-in-the-wall things that I don't call a restaurant. But anyway, so whatever. There's 6,000 restaurants in Manhattan. You can't support 6,000 restaurants if you don't have people coming to work. Every year, how many people commute to Manhattan? How many people commute to Manhattan? 1 million people a day. All right, so 20% of the workforce every day commutes into the city from the suburbs. Those are the most likely people to stop, because it's a nightmare. So those are the most likely people to stop, and also the people who commute from the suburbs are generally the better paid workers in middle and upper management, who probably are going to be best able to shove a lot of their work into remote. So 20% of the workforce in Manhattan commutes in from the suburbs. Those are the people that's 1 million lunches a day that don't get served if they're not commuting. That's a big change. These restaurants, 1 million lunches divided by 6,000 restaurants, right? So 1 million, divided by 6,000. That's 166 lunches per restaurant. You think that's not going to affect them? And you say, okay, well, maybe some people brought their lunch from home. But you get the idea, right? That's 166 per, even with 6,000 restaurants. That's 166 lunches a day that don't get eaten. So not sustainable. That kind of damage is not sustainable. Now, what New York doesn't have? Gas stations. That's very fortunate for them. But New York does not have gas stations. They've got maybe, if they have 8, I'd be surprised. I could only think of like 4 or 5. I gotta imagine there's a couple I'm not thinking of. You don't get gas in New York. That's not a thing. And if you do, you're going to pay through the nose. So those are just lunches that don't get served. Then you're talking about dinners that don't get done, drinks that don't get drunk after work, stores that don't get visited, blah, 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 blah. That's a traumatic change for a city. And if you think about that, and to some scale, that's affecting many, many cities around America. Another thing it could affect is the tax base, and so if the city, and then if these restaurants start closing, what do they get replaced with? What kind of store, and what kind of stores are going to appeal? And you're dealing with a city that just has less money coming in. The 1 million people that come from the suburbs to the city to work are bringing in money. That money is now going out back to the suburbs. This is good for the suburbs, though, so you have to think about that too. This is better for suburban places to go out, better for suburban dining. Of course, you don't tend to, if you're working at home, I don't think you tend to go to the bar afterwards, but maybe people do. I sure don't. Well, I do. Every once in a while we go out. It's just, there's all these repercussions from things happening. And you don't know how it's going to affect long term. And of course, and the other question is now, if all this is going on in the city, at what point do people stop paying $1 million for a one-bedroom apartment? At what point do people stop buying $1,000 per foot offices? And again, that's the other thing. If 20% of the workforce commutes in, and now the 20% of the workforce doesn't commute in anymore, the companies that were basing themselves in the city and are now saying we don't need to be in the city anymore. We could all, if people can work remotely, we've come up with different systems, so on and so forth. Then the office space crashes, right? The people on the buildings start crashing their office space. That's why I really stay away from commercial REITs. And I learned my lesson the hard way in 2009. I used to invest in commercial real estate. I got killed in 2008 because I just never imagined that. You know, I did all the smart stuff. I tried to have diversified amounts of tenants from different businesses, so it wasn't all dependent on one industry and blah, blah, blah. Whole economy crashed. Half a building emptied out, and like in 2 months, half a building emptied out. People couldn't pay their rent. Nobody to replace them. You know, it's just incredible. Stuff you just can't even predict can go wrong. And I know how hard it is, and I know what a struggle it can be for people to pay to keep making payments on these buildings. The market can crash out very, very easily, and there can be a massive surplus of space. And there is a massive surplus of space now. And don't forget, this is a rolling catastrophe because most companies have, you know, 3-year leases, 5-year leases, 10-year leases. They're in the process now of renegotiating them or trying to renegotiate them. Plus the ones that expire. People are saying, okay, well, we're rethinking our plans. You know, we're not gonna retake this space. Certainly not at this price. I live in Delray Beach in Florida, and there are an amazing amount of empty storefronts. Oh, and that's another very important thing I've been reading about is, you know, there's many predictions right now in Canada that the market's going to drop about 25%. The real estate market. It's probably going to happen here too, and the reason for that is, we talked about this before, is when rates go up, the price, it doesn't matter what the, we talked about this, but I'll just do it. It's a mortgage calculator. Okay, right. So your loan is $240,000, 30-year fixed, and your interest is 3%. All right, so that's $1,000 a month. Well, that's an unrealistic home price, isn't it? Though, let's say $400,000. Okay, so $400,000. You have a 3% mortgage, and you're paying $1,686. Now, at the end of the year, Powell says you're going to have a 5% mortgage. All right, so it's going to go from $1,686 to $2,147, so a $500 increase, but that's a 33% or a 30% increase on the cost of your home. You didn't change the price, the interest went up, and it cost the person making the mortgage payment 30% more. So what does that mean? That means they can afford 25%, 30% less home. They can't afford your home. And if that happens to the whole market at the same time, to the whole buying market, and I predicted this a few weeks ago, I told you guys this was going to happen, and the housing reports we've gotten in the last couple of weeks have shown, yes, demand for homes is dropping fast. People aren't buying it. They're having sticker shock. They can't afford it with the rates going up, and the rates are going to go up every single meeting, every month. Things are going to get more expensive. The only thing that's stopping the housing market from crashing right now is the incredibly ridiculous cost of apartments. So you might have to pay $2,147 for your mortgage payment, but you know what? Your freaking landlord just raised the rent $300 on the apartment you're in now, so you're paying $2,000 a month for the apartment. So when you originally thought you were going to pay $1,600, it was going to be cheaper than living in an apartment, and also you won't get the rent raised on you, right? You think, but that's taxes are a different issue because you don't realize how much they can screw you on the taxes. But your original calculation is you're going to pay $2,140 is going to pay $1,600 a month for your rent. I'm sorry, for your mortgage versus maybe $2,000 you're paying now for rent. And you say, well, it makes sense to own, right? Then all of a sudden it's $2,200 for your mortgage and it was $2,000 to your rent. And now you're like, well, we got to figure out how to justify it and so on and so forth. So you're not kicking too many people out yet. But when that number starts getting bigger and bigger and the Fed raises rates and interest rates go up and the mortgages go to 5%, 6%, whatever, all of a sudden, houses are unaffordable. You can always go move to a cheaper apartment. Nobody wants to, but you move to a cheaper apartment. And that's frankly the history of New York is in, you know, when I was a kid, they used to say, when I was a teenager in New York, everybody used to say, don't go over 72nd Street. Over 72nd Street, you're into like a really bad neighborhood. And this was in the 80s when crime was insane, when literally everybody had a story about the time they got mugged. That was just a normal part of living in New York. So if you were over 72nd Street and you get mugged, everybody's like, well, what the hell are you doing up there? Now, you know, then there was a recession, and in the recession, all of a sudden, people start taking these apartments in 72nd Street all the way up to 96. So when I got out of college, so when I'm like 15 years old, basically, I first started really going to the city a lot. 72nd Street was a rule. Into college. After college, only 4 or 5 years later, I come back to the city, people living on 96th Street. I'm like, what? You know, my friends who were moving into the city from college were taking places between 72nd and 96. But they would say, don't go over 96. Then all of a sudden it became like 100 and I think 121 when they moved up to 121. So in every down cycle of the economy, people would start taking over streets. Now, when I say taking over, who are you taking it from? You're taking it from poor people. The people who can't afford to live on below 72nd Street take the apartments that are above 72nd Street. They'll pay more money than the poor tenants who used to be there. The landlords fix up the buildings and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, there's no housing for poor people anymore. And all the poor people get shoved higher and higher into Manhattan until basically middle-class white people start wanting to take those apartments. So now it's basically all the way up to Harlem is being taken over, and even in Harlem you got like starting to get mixed. It's horrible for the people who are in the lower economic groups, and it's really weird work. But they have, you know, I mean, I guess it happens in every city. It's probably been happening in New York since you know, you didn't probably at one time you didn't go above 14th Street or something like that. So there's the show The Gilded Age, right? In I don't know, HBO, I guess it is. And that shows New York at the turn of the century. Or actually before, it's probably like 1880s. And it's very interesting that at that time, I think it was 50th, somebody built a place on 50th Street or 60th Street, and that was considered like really pushing it, because but it's still below Central Park. Central Park starts right around, must be 60th. Yeah, I think 60th Street starts Central Park. So people were building on the south side of the park, and everybody's like, that's so far uptown. Why would you be there? It's a good show. Gilded Age, I think it's called. Anyway, so it's called gentrification, of course, you know, the action of doing that. But that's a cycle that cities go through. So people will push out, and the poor people end up having to get shoved into the suburbs and so on and so forth. But the question is, we're going through this cycle, but the debts in these cycles, New York almost went bankrupt in the 80s. So the last time we had a serious cycle in New York, the city almost broke. And when that happens, and it's happening now, and you're seeing the statistics for crime and things shoot up. When that happens, there's more crime. And more crime, more violence, all sorts of things go wrong. Eventually, the city starts cutting back on services, and they cut back on services, and then everybody's, the people, the subway falls apart. It doesn't take much when things are being used by millions and millions of people every single day. It doesn't take much for them to start falling apart. You have to maintain stuff constantly to keep it running. I mean, there is so much wear and tear on everything. So I was going to say we have this problem in Delray because there's so many empty storefronts, and the problem is, and here's why though. Because we didn't have a proper recession. The government stepped in and prevented a recession by lowering the rates. So the landlords refinance these properties they have at lower rates. So instead of themselves taking less money to fill their spaces, so effectively lowering the rents, instead of the rents coming down in price to be affordable, and this goes for the housing market too, people kept their prices up, and that's why what you have now is a low supply of housing on the market. There are people who refuse to sell their houses at lower prices. So they won't sell for what the market demands. It's not that people don't want houses. They want houses, but they can't afford them. And so eventually you hit a breaking point where either the consumer has to give, the buyers have to give and pay more, or the sellers have to give and charge less. And that breaking point, unless you're giving massive raises to the workers who are looking for houses and apartments, the breaking point is going to come, and these landlords are going to end up taking a bath. But right now, it's all being subsidized by the government, which is wrong, by the way, because it's actually healthy when the housing market crashes, when the apartment market crashes, when the commercial market crashes. It allows stores and people and businesses to come in and innovate and start off cheap and have a good rent. When I first, there was a place I took in Keyport, New Jersey, the building, and it had just flooded. That's why we went there. The town had just flooded, and we looked, and it was what they call a 100-year flood zone. So once every 100 years, it floods on the average. I mean, who knows? Who knows how much the government actually knows about this? As it turns out, with the weather changing, they don't know anything. But this was an oceanside town, and they had just had a massive flood from a big storm, and so nobody wanted to live in this. Nobody wanted to be in this building, and so we got it for some silly price, like $4 a foot or something like that, like some crazy price. At the time, I think $8 a foot was a good price, and $10 a foot was normal, and we got it for $4 a foot because people they were literally fixing the flood damage while we were signing the lease. And me and my partners were like, well, this is very unlikely to happen again. And it didn't. So, and then it didn't happen again in the 10 years we were there after that. So, when you start up and so, and again, so for us to have that space and to be paying that little, it made it possible for us to start our business in a very healthy way without a bad cash flow issue or anything like that. It's a huge difference. So this is a healthy economy. It's how you build a healthy economy. You let new businesses come in and innovate. And like I said, cities have to change, but they're not going to change if the only things that can afford to go in downtown are chain stores. And that's happening in my town because it's the regular places can't afford, like a regular business can't afford to come in and pay. These one spaces are, about the size of a normal hardware store kind of size, or like a neighborhood little shop kind of size. They're regular neighborhood stores, and there's a bunch of them lined up that are all empty and have been empty for two years now, totally empty. Landlord won't lower the price. He wants $4,500 a month in rent, which is a lot of freaking money. You got to think of how much money how much sales do you have to pay $4,500 in rent, pay your staff, pay your utilities? At what point do you make any money as a business owner? And I'm talking retail, not restaurants. So, it's a little bit crazy. So that's the problem, though. Now, for $2,500 a month, there's a lot of people who make a going business out of something. But for $4,500 a month, it's not affordable. How is a city going to change if you only do it? And so what's happening in my town is there's a lot of these places where the rents are unaffordable. And so places that used to be nice local businesses are turning into chain stores, which is disgusting. And you guys, you've seen it all over the country. You see it happen to cities. You have these lovely little places. They have their own personality, and all of a sudden, it's nothing but like the Gap, Tommy Bahama, and whatever, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts. It's like, it's like, please, it's like, that's not why you want to live in these towns. So, where was I? Anyway, so, ooh, wow, what happened? Market's like crashing. Well, just the Dow seems to be crashing. I'm not sure why. One of the Dow components, something must have happened. Because the Dow's down 1 full percent. Well, everybody's down. No, the Russell's down 1%. I guess everybody's down about a point. There's 8.3. That's 8.7. Oil's still up at 114. Apple's good though. Apple's up 2%. They don't care. But anyway, so in a large scale city like New York, unless there are adjustments and you can bring in new businesses, it's the whole city can collapse. If you can't afford to fix the trains and you start breaking down their vital there are certain key vital connections that you have to maintain. The bridges and tunnels cost a fortune to maintain. And in fact, our old friend Christie, he was the governor of Jersey for a while. Now I'm not sure what he is, but he's some kind of Republican something. When he came into office, we had this $5 billion set aside that had been literally at a rate of maybe $250 million a year for 10 years. Every politician, every governor, Republican or Democrat, had been putting money into a fund to build a new Lincoln Tunnel, because the Lincoln Tunnel is many, many years past its service life. And at this point, it costs more money to repair it than, like, if you put a new tunnel in, it would be cheaper than what we're doing now, which is repairing it every year. And so it's basically costing $1 billion a year to maintain it. So in other words, you replace it, a lot of money. You replace it for like $15 billion or $20 billion. But the deal was, we would put in $5 billion, New York would put in $5 billion, Jersey would put in $5 billion, New York would put in $5 billion, and the government would put in $10 billion. That was an agreement that was made. So right at the time that we had the $5 billion finally saved up, New York, of course, they had their share already, but Jersey's poor by comparison. So Christie comes into office, and he then declares that the tunnel is not necessary. Now, when he declares the tunnel is not necessary, and New Jersey will not participate in the project, aside from putting away $5 billion in matching federal money, which was insane, what happens, though, effectively, is the $5 billion ends up being surplus money. So it had to be used in transportation-related projects, but it wasn't specifically labeled just for the tunnel. And because of that, what Christie did is he was able to pass out $5 billion worth of favor projects to all of his buddies and get kickbacks. So anything, so there was construction and road work and all sorts of stuff being done all over the state by very barely competent people who were friends of Christie. And he literally gave away all that money. So now, many years later, I mean, this is 15 years later, we still have not fixed the tunnel, and it is about to burst. There is literally, I'm nervous when I go through the Lincoln Tunnel. It is in really, really bad shape. And not only that, there's a train tunnel, you go through in the cars, but there's a train tunnel parallel to the car tunnel, and that is beyond vital. If that's in bad shape, that's in really bad shape. And if that thing goes, it'll take years. You'll have years and years of complete traffic disaster, because the alternative, the way New York is from Jersey, and Jersey being anybody on that side of the river, because there's also, above us is upstate New York is above New Jersey on that side of the river, and below us is Delaware and Pennsylvania down there, people coming up to New York and through New Jersey to New York, people even going from Pennsylvania through New Jersey to New York. You know, people actually commute all the way from Pennsylvania to New York. It's like 2 hours. It's insane. But frankly, Connecticut, which is only like 40 miles away, also takes 2.5 hours, 3 hours to get to New York because of the traffic. But meanwhile, there's 3 ways to get there. You have the Washington Bridge. You have, well, there's the Tappan Zee Bridge, which is way up north, up in upstate New York. You have the Washington Bridge, then you have the Lincoln Tunnel, and then you have the Holland Tunnel. So if anything happens to the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel and the Washington Bridge, which are on both sides of it, would become just beyond unusable due to traffic. Then also the wear and tear on those would become stressful. And the Holland Tunnel is actually older than Lincoln Tunnel, but it was built better. So the Holland Tunnel is still pretty functional. Holland Tunnel was built in like 1900, really incredible. I mean, the engineer for that time, for them to do that job was unbelievable. So, you know, that's one of the reasons I got out of New York, because eventually that's going to happen. I lived in Jersey. If you take that place where I lived in Jersey and say you can't go to New York anymore, that lowers the value tremendously of living up there. That will happen at some point. There will be an incredible traffic disaster. So there's things like that. Of course, we also in New York get completely flooded in that hurricane a couple of years ago. They don't have the money for these things. They don't have the money to fix stuff. They don't have the money to prevent stuff. The government certainly isn't stepping in and doing things that it needs to do. So we have a lot of problems, and this is now I'll get back to the main point of this. This is why I'm very nervous going forward. It's like we keep investing in this inflating market that is completely ignoring the structural problems of the entire U.S. economy that are getting worse. We should be spending $1 trillion a year, just America, fighting global warming. And every country, I think globally, it needs to be about $5 trillion. Our contribution would be about 20% of that based on our economy. One would be $1 trillion a year. And that's what we need, according to almost everybody who's done the math, is what we need to start making a change to get off this track of like the earth is going to be, literally, if we're not going to destroy the climate, make it uninhabitable for mankind, we're going to make it very uncomfortable for mankind. Very uncomfortable, like would you like to live in Death Valley kind of uncomfortable. Can we survive? I don't know. I mean, could you survive? Well, what's the solution? More air conditioning. That's not going to help, right? That's not climate friendly. Where are you going to grow your crops? You can hide in an air conditioned apartment. Your crops can't. Although we're working on that too. So we'll grow our crops indoors. Eventually, you like that what's that Planet of the Apes movie where the people lived underground, right? It's like, they moved underground, mankind, and they were all like pasty, horrible, scary people. What are we doing? What are we heading towards? So, but that's a long-term thing. But the short term is that New York will have more flooding. New York will have infrastructure problems. New York will have crumbling roadways. We don't know the impact of the lower tax base in New York yet. And I keep saying New York, it's like it's the example I can talk most knowledgeably about. But it's true in Miami. It's true in a lot of cities. It's Philadelphia. In fact, Philadelphia is just flooded like crazy this year. There's some incredible flooding in Philadelphia. The world is changing. It's very much so, and this disaster money is difficult to come by, and we just don't have the reserves. We're not prepared for this stuff at all, and it's going to slow the economy. It's going to impact the people. There's going to be some major upheavals, and we're still spending 30 times, 35 times multiples for companies. That makes no sense. It will stop. Something will make it stop. It can't keep doing it. Any questions? Phil, Disney. Do you think this is a good time to get into looking at the new BCS on this, maybe 24-140? All right, that's from Bernie. So do we like Disney now? The thing about Disney, which I think we've talked about, well, maybe not in the webinar, talked about it in the chat. I think Disney has, I think they've gotten very greedy, and it's good for the bottom line, but it's not good for, I think long term their reputation is getting damaged, and I'm not sure how it's going to affect them going forward. Of course, Disney has Marvel and the film franchises and all that stuff, and they seem to be able to, they can snap their fingers and make $1 billion movie. I mean, that alone is worth a lot. But they also have to shell out $1 billion, they have to shell out a huge amount of money to make these movies. I mean, if you figure they've got 10 superhero films coming out in the next 2 years, right? Each one costs them at least a couple of $100 million to make and promote. It's $2 billion they have to lay out on these movies, so they recoup it, but you got to lay it out. So it's it's tricky. Same thing for the parks. It costs them so much money to make these new rides and do it, but if you don't keep up, people don't come back to the park anymore. Everybody has to have new stuff constantly. Which is kind of weird because, when I was a kid, 1970, I was like 7 years old. We went to 70, 71. Whenever the Florida Disneyland opened, Disney World, we went there. And at the time, I mean, there was no Epcot and stuff, but there was the Disney World, there was the Pirates of the Caribbean, there was a Matterhorn, or not Matterhorn, there was Space Mountain, there was the Jungle Cruise, blah, blah, blah. Now, when I had kids in the year 2000, 30 years later, basically all the same rides, a Haunted Mansion, the Jungle Cruise, blah, blah, blah. There weren't that many new rides. There was a whole MGM Hollywood Studios they built. They built the Animal Kingdom. That all happened though since my kids were born, basically. They built the Animal Kingdom Lodge. They built the MGM Studios. They built Epcot, was already there when my kids were born, but that was the new one. That was the newer one that they built, which I don't know when they did that, but it came around. And there's another one. I think there's one more park. MGM, Animal Kingdom, Epcot. I feel like there's another one. I don't know. And there's a couple of water parks. But that's the thing, to keep it fresh, they keep building stuff because people these days expect new and new and new and new, and they're not going to just come back for the same stuff. So like I was saying, when I came, so between 1970 and when my kids are born in 2000, not much change. And didn't need any change. We're very happy to go back to Disney with the same rides and the same stuff because it was a classic. Now there's all the, now they've got Star Wars and all this other crap, but the thing is, look at the prices. They've gone into a super luxury mode that is probably good for them, probably profitable, but they're really turning off people. And the thing about that is, I think they're misinterpreting a little bit of their brand. And I know Iger's coming, and he's not happy. He stepped in to do some stuff. Because he's on the board. There's a value of the audience that they're missing. So in other words, if you don't bring the kids to Disney, if a regular kid can't go to Disney, then they're no longer going to get injected with that sort of love of the characters and the way Disney does things and so on and so forth. And if you don't have that positive image of the brand, are they going to still be able to do these super luxury things? Are they still going to get people to watch all their movies? Are they still going to get people to buy all their merchandise? Are people going to still wear all the clothes, so on and so forth? I think that's a problem for them. I don't think that they're really doing that. And by the way, it's the same thing in baseball. That's what actually killed baseball, was they started making baseball more of a luxury experience, and it turned off the fans. When the free agency came along, the ballparks raised their prices and so on and so forth. They took away the the normal thing that every kid would do was go to games. And instead of normal kids going to games, rich kids went to games constantly, and poor kids didn't go to games. And that hurt them on TV. It hurt them in merchandising. It hurt them in a lot of things. You have to have that broad appeal. You can't be just a luxury brand, and especially when you're a mass market company like this. So, meanwhile, they're going to make $10 billion. Let's give them that, and they're $255 billion, so it's 25 times earnings. It's not cheap, and there's risk, and part of the risk is COVID. They're shut down in China right now. We don't know that COVID is really over. They planned on making, I'm sure they planned on making $10 billion in 2020. They lost 2.8. Then the next year they had planned on making 10 billion. They made 1.9 billion. Now, it's nice to make money even though it's COVID, but on the other hand, they didn't make a lot that they had planned on. So coming out of that setback, they are hoping to refill the cash reserves this year and next year and put 18 billion back in the bank. If that goes well and they have 10 billion in sales, then sure, 25 times earning is not too bad, right? But if anything at all goes wrong, all of a sudden, this is this is just still an overpriced stock. So I do not love Disney here. I certainly wouldn't want to get into them until that's probably the 50-day moving average. Let's take a look over here. I would want to see them get over that line at least to make sure they can do it. Yeah, see, that's a 50-day moving average. So they are, we talk about death crosses. They death crossed here in October. And now let's zoom out. So here, wow, here is where they death crossed, and here's what happened since they death crossed, right? And what is this? They've been following the 50-day moving average has become their ceiling now, right? They got dragged lower, dragged lower, dragged lower. The 50-day is still in decline. The 200-day is still in decline. And the 200-day can still come back. It's going to apply, as long as this thing's in downtrend, it's going to be applying pressure. So until now, what's going to stop the 200-day moving average from being in a downtrend? Well, obviously, this has to cross over the 200-day moving average. As long as it's under and the 50 is 20 points below, so more than 10% below the 200-day moving average, as long as they're under the 50-day moving average, and you've got a 10% gap here, that means you're doing a drag every single day. You're pulling this thing sharper and sharper lower, that you're below this 50-day moving average. You're sharpening the drop on the 20-day moving average. That is not good. In fact, if this keeps going on for a very long time, but let's say we're talking about $20 drop, right? So how long did it take to fall 20 bucks? So we go to 83 here. And this was November, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 months from now, at this pace, okay, so 5 months from now at this pace, the 200-day moving average will hit 140 if they stay below the 50-day. And if this hits 140 and they are coming along and jam into the 140, they could drop like this again and come back to 120. Now, where did we get excited about Disney? At $99. When Disney went under 100, that's when we first started buying the crap out of it, because I said that was a crazy low price. But that number is 20% low. Is that right? 20%, 26? More than 20% below. It's 25% below where we are now. 25% below where we are now is a PE under 20, where I like Disney. Because at the time, Disney was making, and we still have it in the butterfly portfolio because I don't think it's going to collapse. But, you know, when we were buying Disney and really liking it was when they were making 10, they were moving up from 9 to 10 to $12 billion a year in profit. And we liked them when they were more like $200 billion. So the PE was below 20. Now you're looking at 25. I know it's hard to say no to a stock. It's very, very hard, especially in attractive stocks, just like women. It's very hard to say no to Disney. It's a very attractive stock. We love it. We can't imagine that we'll be unhappy with it. We think it's going to give us good times, but you have to have the discipline to say not necessarily now. Disney is a hotel company. Disney is a cruise line company. All right, Disney is a theme park company, and Disney is a studio company but also the sports. They're a movie company and they're a sports company. Now, clearly, as we know from the Scarlett Johansson lawsuit, they don't make very much money on the home. By comparison, the money Scarlett Johansson got from the release of her movie on pay-per-view, Black Widow on pay-per-view, even though it was the most watched pay-per-view, not pay-per-view, I'm sorry, on Disney Plus. It was the most watched Disney Plus thing ever. She took Disney to court over that because it was bullshit. Because she didn't make anywhere near the kind of money she was supposed to make from a theatrical release. And boy, I imagine how pissed off she must have been when Spider-Man comes out and makes $1 billion. I mean, that's just really unfair. So the bottom line is that as much as I love Disney, I would not be running in to jump on this train until we see a definitive improvement in the thing. And again, this goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. The main thing, my main point of today's thing is I think the overall market environment, okay, when I no, that's not what I want. So, when I'm looking at the paper, I'm going to look at the real paper, not the Wall Street Journal. As long as this is the top of the paper, the war, rockets in Kiev, extensive damage, NATO plans to add forces as Biden tries to rally allies. What do you think World War III looks like? Don't be complacent. This is not World War III, okay? Definitely not it. Remember your history. Remember, again, it takes years for these things to fester. The war didn't erupt overnight. It's like Europe and, you got to look at the timeline. So look, it's more like World War I than World War III, but timeline, World War. See, pick one. Pick a world war. Oh God, it's horrible. Interactive timeline. Really? Ew, I don't like that at all. Is that seriously how you want me to navigate this? Ugh, that looks much more realistic. There we go. Okay, so June, Archduke Ferdinand is assassinated. July, 1 month later, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Okay, a guy is assassinated, then Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. So far, it's a regional skirmish, right? This is Russia declares war on. They won't even declare war, frankly. They're just still calling it I don't know what it is, a rescue operation or something. So Russia declares war on Ukraine. Then August, another month, not a month, it's only, here's a week later, Germany invades Luxembourg and Belgium. What? Wait a minute. Why is Germany invading Luxembourg and Germany? France invades Alsace. What? British forces arrive in France. Nations allied against Germany were eventually, okay, blah, blah, blah. So now all of this, eventually, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, what is Australia even doing in this thing? You have to. I guess they had to because they were part of England at the time. New Zealand, South Africa, also part of England, Rhodesia, also part of England, Romania, Greece, France, Belgium, the US, Canada, Serbia, India, Portugal, God, Montenegro. They sent both people. So they were still in August. Austria-Hungary invades Russia. Allied forces halt German advance into France in September. I mean, these are months, not 1 month, not 3 weeks, not 2 weeks. Things fester. There is a war. Shelling is going on. Bombing is going on. Atrocities are being committed. Okay, at a certain point, Poland, no love of Russia, can join into the fight. Now it's spreading to Poland. Then, and then, you know, I mean, then Russia could bomb something that pisses NATO off, and then NATO countries will start upping the ante, and then Russia comes in, and who knows what China's going to do, and it's a disaster. This is, you know, you don't see a war just start. It's not like everybody declares war and puts up a banner and says, "Here we are." This is very, very unstable and dangerous, and we have to take this seriously. So that's his timeline for World War I. And then, okay, so now, did we learn our lesson? That's the question. Now, did we learn our lesson? Wait, oh, come on. World War II timeline. Here you go. Hopefully this one's as nice as the other one. What? Go away. Oh, God, see, now it's all dark on me. Is Wetzel, South Florida? Sure. I don't know. Okay, World War I ends. Oh, how great. Okay. All right. Hitler is appointed. When does he actually? Okay, World War II begins. Germany invades Poland. Here you go. September 1939. Soviet Union invades Poland. Warsaw captured. All right, so okay, so here we are. Look at that. So that's interesting. So Germany involves Poland September 1st. Warsaw is captured at the end of the month. This is what Russia's trying to do right now. Russia invades Ukraine, and they want to have a thing that says Kiev is captured. All right. UK has a sea battle. Norway is invaded. What the frick? Why Norway get invaded? What was the point of that? Then Churchill becomes minister. Then the Dunkirk thing. Holy cow! Oh, well, these are really, you're really skipping over here. And where's Austria-Hungary and so on and so forth. I mean, it's not very. This is a terrible timeline, and they're not at all telling you what's going on. Timeline key dates. Oh, here you go. Wikipedia. Was Wikipedia the one that had a nice one last time? No, this is awful. Timeline of World War. Oh wow, they're like super detailed. That's why. All right, 1939. Oh, too much to read. Come on. Summarize it nicely for me. Oh, there you go. Timeline for kids. No. Too dumbed down. Oh, wait, that might work. So Germany invades Poland. France and Britain declare war on Germany. Germany invades and takes control of Denmark and Norway. But look, September, April the next year, May, Germany takes over much of Western Europe all of a sudden. All right. So we don't know what Putin wants to do. We don't know where this is going. It is a terrible idea to just sit there and buy and do this stuff like it's all normal. It's not normal at all. This is a superpower being aggressive. And it's all because, you know, we stood there like idiots when they took over Crimea, and now they're using Crimea as a staging point to move on. So you don't think if Putin takes over the rest of the Ukraine, for one thing, I mean, how do you even allow that? How do you allow the world to be back in a situation where one big country can take over its neighboring countries? I mean, what does that mean? Should we take over Canada? Is that okay now? Do we just take, we say, oh, we like that. Trump wanted Greenland, he could have just taken it. It's supposed to be unthinkable. And now we have to sit there and say, well, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? So, this is what I look at as the bigger picture macro conditions that are going on in the world right now. I don't want to make too many commitments. I want to be very, very careful about what I'm getting into. And honestly, I literally have this problem all the time. Like, I keep looking at these portfolios and saying, like, do we have to get out of everything? We may have to stop. I don't know for sure that we can protect ourselves. Well, look at the Futures Now portfolio. It came back so nicely, right? So now it's back up 123%. That's the problem, though, right? So I always do that. I look at the portfolio. I'm like, oh man, look how good everything's doing all of a sudden again. And that's even with Coinbase still sucking. Cowen we just talked about today, and they're still sucking, but we know we think we can probably fix that. Rocket is also bad. We've got some bad ones here. But yeah, that's what happened to this portfolio. Got hit by a couple of plays that went really bad because people just sort of lost confidence. We had SoFi. That's not good. Although we sold the puts, I'm not too worried. But Rewalk, nothing. That's a real shame. Now we have 20,000 shares of them at 189. They're down to 116. I'm not terribly worried, but I'm very disappointed in the way they're performing. But the long-term portfolio, probably not today, but it's been blasting higher. Now, that's crazy, 406%. It's $2.5 million. We started out with $500,000 in October of 2019. But more to the point, it's up a couple of $100,000 in 2 weeks. Not even 2 weeks, it was a week ago. A week ago, we did the review of the long-term portfolio on Friday. Wasn't it like just Friday? That is crazy. Log in. That's better. No, not Monday. So I think Friday's the day we did it. So getting down to, here we go. Whoop. Yeah, we were at 2392 on Friday, and we're at 2530. So $140,000 in the long-term portfolio since Friday. That's crazy. So it's hard to actually pull the trigger and get out. And especially when I look at each and and again, I'm not going to go. We just did a whole review on Friday, but you look at every single one and say, Apple, am I gonna pay $4,000 not to buy Apple for net $98? No, I want to buy Apple for $98. I really, really do. I'm never going to get that chance. It's at 171, but I want to buy it for 98. So I'm going to leave these puts. There's no way I'm letting go of those. Okay, there's one down. Alaska Airlines, the $40 puts we sold for $5, so we're at net 35. So am I going to pay $2,000 not to buy Alaska Airlines for 35 when it's at 54? No, that'd be stupid. Why would I do that? That makes no sense. So you have to go through each one and say, is this something I would do? Do I want to buy it? Here's a Best Buy. We sold the $70 puts for $10, so net 60, and it's at 96 now. Do I want to pay $3,000 not to buy Best Buy for 60? No. And that's what I have to do. And when I did the review, that's what we're doing. We're going through every single position one by one and saying, do I want to get rid of this? Do I want to cash it out? And it's not. There's no particular positions here that we found that we didn't want to have anymore. But there's a lot of positions, and the problem is now. Here's the thing: if we're wrong, though, if it turns out that what could go wrong? Number one thing that can go wrong, we could have another massive COVID wave that shuts everything back down. That's a completely random thing. Let's say there's a 10-20% chance of that happening. Could happen any time in the next year. That's one problem. Problem number two. Several problems. Problem number two in the Ukraine is the war could spread. Other countries can get sucked in, and you're getting into a world war situation. Number one problem. There's got to be at least a 10% chance of that happening. Problem number two. Currently, Russia is holding all the workers at Chernobyl hostage and maintaining the plant over there. A lot of shit can go wrong over there. A Russian missile, which had been fired indiscriminately all over the place, could hit a nuclear plant. That would cause a massive catastrophe on a fairly global scale. Certainly, something that would destroy that would harm all of Europe and cause major problems. And again, possibly leading to World War III. Number four. At some point, NATO, and NATO is not just us. We don't get to make these decisions. We lost that right under Trump, and Merkel basically became the leader. And right now, there's no clear leader for NATO, but it ain't us. So NATO, at some point, could get pissed off about the civilian casualties in Ukraine. They could get pissed off if Putin uses chemical weapons or something else, or other banned weapons, which he has in his arsenal. The NATO can say, we are stepping in. Now, if NATO steps in, here's another thing: if NATO steps in and we don't support NATO, that could lead to a major rift in NATO, which is frankly what Putin is looking for. But most likely Biden will do what NATO does. He will abide by NATO and their treaties and so on and so forth. Then China's a wild card too, because China is watching to wait to see. China supports Russia taking over Ukraine because China wants to take over Taiwan. And by the way, China basically brutally took over Hong Kong. They didn't hurt anybody so much. They took some prisoners, political prisoners. People disappeared, so on and so forth, but nothing devastating. But they took Hong Kong completely over. They had a sham election. They put in their own politicians to be the governor, and so on and so forth, to run it. And they took away all the people's rights and all the stuff they promised they wouldn't do until 2040. They started doing now. It's now basically a Chinese city. So that's, they want to do the same kind of thing to Taiwan one way or another. So a lot of stuff can go wrong there. And honestly, this is not so. And if something like that happens, and maybe if you wrap them all together, it's maybe a 25% chance that something catastrophic happens. But then we know for a fact the Fed says for a fact they're raising rates 2% this year. The 2%, as we know, 2% on $32 trillion in debt is by itself $600 billion of additional interest that has to be paid by the government somehow. Nobody's planning on this at all. Meanwhile, the government still has to borrow $3 trillion to pay the bills this year because we're $3 trillion deficit this year, and add $600 billion to that. So it's $3.6 trillion that we have to come up with because we don't have enough money to pay our bills and the interest that's already due on our other stuff. And at some point, somebody might notice that too. And I'd say that's got a 30% chance of happening. As we were doing the math, the housing is going to become an issue, and if housing becomes an issue, other rents will become an issue. We could have a property collapse like 2008. Any of these things are going to make it, and any of these things are going to make it very, very hard to liquidate your portfolio on the fly. And that's where it's a problem, because we have a lot of long positions, and it'll take a long time to get rid of them. Or if we try to do it quickly, it can be messy too. That's why hedges are so critical. That's why we just bumped our hedges up $300,000 today. Because if you don't have money coming in from the hedges, you can be totally screwed. Now, if the LTP goes to 0 tomorrow, gets completely wiped out, the short-term portfolio is going to go to $2 million. It's 400,000 now. It'll gain 1.3, but not everything is covered. So, you know, a complete catastrophe will take us from $3 million to $2 million in theoretical liquidation. Reality-wise, though, it's not likely the long-term portfolio is going to go from 2.5, what is it? 2.8? What's the number? 2.5. So from 2.5 million, the chances are we'll retain $1 million by the time we liquidate, even in a catastrophe. If we retain $1 million here and the short-term portfolio goes to $2 million, we have $3 million. But we have $3 million when the whole market crashed and there's tons of stuff to buy. So we're going to have a freaking party if the market drops 50% all of a sudden. Our biggest problem, though, in that situation is the short puts. And it's not just these short puts, but it's these short puts too. There's a lot of short put, short put, short put, short put, short put, short put, short put. So there's not 30 short puts, there's 70 short puts in this long-term portfolio, or roughly whatever the number is, but there's lots of short puts. So the first thing we have to put a cap on if the market starts failing is to start getting rid of these short put situations. Now, in general, as you can see, green, 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 green. It's not like we're losing money by cutting them all. You know, we wish we got this money, but if we don't forget, all this money is money that we don't have yet. It's a negative in the portfolio. So if we buy these back, we diminish our cash and we take away the obligations. We have $1.8 million worth of cash. So if we buy all of these things back, 30, all right, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 120, 125, 130, 40, 50, 190, 200, let's call it 210, 220, 230. So there's about $240,000 worth of short puts here. So if we zip these out completely, all right, then we knock down $250,000 worth of cash. Here, I'm sure there's probably about the same. We don't usually take elaborately large short puts. You know, it's generally the same kind of proportions on the short puts so that we don't have too many like that. We also have, no, that's not significant. There's no major, well, it's not like the butterfly portfolio where we have like an Apple position that's like the whole portfolio. There's nothing so massively outstanding in the long-term portfolio, I don't think, as far as the net cash. So let's say that we have $250,000 here, and let's say we have even $500,000 here of short puts. That would still leave us with basically $1 million of cash after we buy back all the short puts, and then all we have left are bull call spreads that are covered. Now we know that the bull call spreads are not going to change very much, even in a declining market. So we could hang on, we could wait, we could do whatever. That's not going to be an emergency. So basically what would happen, we would liquidate, take a loss obviously on the liquidation because the short puts will be costing a bit more to get out of, but we'll still have most of the value of this portfolio here, just less cash. And then if we want to get our cash back, we start killing our bull call spreads and cashing those out as well. And meanwhile, don't forget there's plenty of short calls here, and the short calls will be making money while that's happening, and we could sell more short calls on the way down. So from a planning perspective, unless the market drops 50% overnight, like unless there's a 9/11 situation, and by the way, if Russia drops a nuclear weapon, which is not very likely at all, but if anywhere on Earth a nuclear weapon is dropped, yes, we will have a 9/11 kind of situation where the markets will be shut for days, a week, who knows how long, and when it reopens, you will be facing like catastrophic losses. That can happen. And though it's unlikely to happen, it's a lot more likely to happen now in this current situation than it was last year when all we had to worry about was a virus killing everybody. So we are back to, that nuclear clock is set like a second to midnight kind of thing, where it's like really anything could happen, any crazy thing could happen to trigger a bomb. And again, not a nuclear war. I'm talking about, it doesn't matter where. If any city on Earth is wiped out by a nuclear weapon, that's going to be a global catastrophe. That's going to shut the markets down. People are going to reorganize things. And then what are the repercussions of that? How do we punish Russia? What warnings are we going to have? We will be on the brink of a nuclear war for years to come. So dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. So you can't be complacent about your investments, and that's got to be in the background of what you're thinking all the time. And I'm not trying. I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm trying to be realistic. You have to consider the possibility, and you've got to have a plan. That's why, again, hedges are so critical, because if something horrifying happens, at least we know we're going to have $2 million in the short-term portfolio, so we could only lose a third of everything we have. And that was why I made those changes today. I made those changes today because I want to be not exposed to losses. In other words, we had a couple of positions where we had oversold the short calls, and I'm not feeling comfortable about that given the catastrophic possibilities that are still with us right now. And look, the Ukraine can settle down into an Afghanistan situation where the same Russia with the same tanks and the same bombs and the same weapons tried to take over Afghanistan for 20 freaking years, and they never could do it. And those guys fight with rocks. Okay, Ukraine's got actual weapons and is getting more weapons and is getting NATO support. We kind of supported the Taliban also, but not like we're supporting Ukraine. We're going to be putting a lot more into Ukraine than we put into Afghanistan. But again, it's a proxy war. We're fighting. We're letting Russia fight it out with U.S. weapons without us actually being involved. That's why Biden's touchy about the no-fly zone, because the no-fly zone forces American jets to shoot down Russian jets. And again, that's a serious, serious trigger. And by the way, Biden is in Europe. Another reason I got worried today, Biden is on the way to Europe right now to impose more sanctions on Russia, and may end up with the European leaders actually committing more troops, more weapons, so on and so forth, and escalating the war. So, it's that kind of environment, and you've got to have. And again, I'm not saying don't invest. I'm saying don't invest without a plan for what you're going to do when the market drops 50% on you. And literally, easily 20% over any night at all. You could wake up and have the market shut down, and by the time it reopens, things will be down 10, 20% easily. We are always hedged for a 20% drop, but again, we're in one of those situations where something could happen that could shut the markets down for longer. And I'm sorry, we forgot about cyber attacks. It is possible for a successful cyber attack to shut down the US banking system. What if we can't do what if you can't use your credit card? What if you can't use your debit card for a week? What if people's bank accounts get stolen? What if on a mass scale, Russia, let's say they just manage to penetrate one bank and wipe out everybody's accounts in one bank and knock things offline. Okay, and even if the bank can fix it and go to backups and do this and that and blah blah blah, you can have millions of people, tens of millions of people for a week not having access to money, businesses not having access to money. That's if one bank goes down, a huge portion of the economy can go down with it. Okay, what if Russia hacks into the electrical company and sends everybody a $10,000 bill? What if they hack into AT&T? What if they hack into cable? What if they disconnect your TV? What if they disconnect services? You know, these are all things that can happen. You know, hopefully they won't, but it's not without being possible. And we are in a situation of war. We have, and by the way, we're doing it to them. We have Anonymous, who technically we don't technically endorse Anonymous, but we're not doing anything about it. Joe Biden's not saying naughty Anonymous. Everybody's laughing and thinks this is all fun and games. But these guys are not government backed. They're not endorsed. They're not checking in with strategic planning or anything like that. This is a bunch of kids. Well, not all kids, but but it's a bunch of people who are programmers and they are hackers, and some of them are really, really good and are able to penetrate government systems and so on and so forth. And they're doing whatever they want. This is not a coordinated thing. But Russia is going to have a coordinated response by their teams of experts and so on and so forth. And they're not going to say, oh, we're only going to go after the people in Anonymous. They're going to indiscriminately go after American companies and government agencies and so on and so forth, like Anonymous is doing. We're fighting a cyber war with Russia right now. They just haven't fired back yet. But you know what? It's kind of scary that they haven't. I would rather see them do some ineffective, stupid things, the way Anonymous is doing a lot of ineffective, stupid things, than think about maybe they're planning a very large coordinated attack that they've had in their back pocket for a long time. They could have gotten backdoor access to Citibank 3 years ago, and all they're doing now is testing it to make sure it still works and saying, well, okay, so if we only get one shot of this, how are we going to take down the most possible people at one time? How do we shut the banking accounts down? How do we drain all the money out? How do we do this, do that? Whatever it is they're able to do. Even if you just change everyone's passwords, it's a nightmare. Just think about it. But we don't know. It's an unprecedented situation. So all these things and again, you could tomorrow wake up and your broker account could be down. Your whole brokerage could be down under attack. And they're going to say, well, sorry, you can't do anything. You can't trade. You can't transact. You can't do anything. And meanwhile, because that happened to your brokerage, the rest of the people in every other brokerage start selling you like crazy. And now you're sitting here like, oh, gee, I hope this works out. Again, I think they probably shut the entire market down. If one major brokerage was out, I think they'd probably not allow everybody else to sell while those guys are screwed. But again, without hedges, you can get really devastated, and it's not going to be easy. We had in 2008, even when the brokerage was open in 2008, Thinkorswim kept going down. Options Express went down a bunch of times. I think some of the major guys went down. I don't want to cast any dispersions on anybody if they didn't. But people could not access their brokerage accounts because they were just too crowded. People couldn't get trades to fill, so on and so forth. You got to be prepared for this kind of stuff. So honestly, don't go looking for new trade opportunities until you're sure you're covered in the back. And again, that's what we just did this morning. That's what this morning's post was all about, is let's make sure we're covered. And I feel, we just added 30-something% more coverage to where we were, and I feel better about that And yes, and we actually added a couple of longs today too, because I felt that was okay. But you gotta, I'm sorry, I forgot what the numbers were. We spent, what is this? Oh, that's not today. I'm looking at this whole thing being like, well, and you know what? Up $3 million. I mean, $3 million in our portfolios is a good place to stop and start from scratch again. Anyway, I think it's just very difficult to put this back together. It's so well balanced that I hate to pull the plug on it. But $3 million cash and sitting out for a couple of months would make me very happy, frankly. So I'm sorry. So the total here was okay. Oh, we had 33%. How much did we spend? We spent, I didn't even add that up. 2,700. Okay. So 35,000, 2,700, 33,000. So that's like $70,000. If we buy 50 more coal, no. Okay, here you go, $100,000. We spend 30,000 there, and 15. That's $115,000. So we spend $115,000 out of, and that was my intention, so that works out. We're up 200,000 in the combined portfolio. So we're up $200,000, and we took $115,000, half of it basically, and we added how many more hedges? And we added 300. Well, we were at $1 million, so we added $342,000 worth of hedges after spending $115,000. And again, it's not just, and again, I didn't add it. We bought back short calls and uncovered a couple of positions. So theoretically, we have more headroom to make more money, but I didn't count that. I just counted the spread as if it was going to stop there. So really, there's more than we added more than 342,000. But either way, the point is, we took half the money we made on paper and used it to lock it in, because I feel better. I would rather have that $1.3 million that'll get us to $2 million, like I said, to get us to $2 million on the short-term portfolio, because worst comes to worst, the market crashes 50%. We have $2 million in cash in the short-term portfolio. The long-term portfolio is wiped out. Again, not very likely, but let's say it happens. And but now everything in the market is at half price, and we have $2 million of cash. Okay, that's not a bad situation. Then we go and buy IBM and Intel and AT&T and Procter & Gamble, blah, blah, blah. And then we have a portfolio of like 10 blue chip stocks to rebuild the world on. So then we want Disney, then we want Disney, then we want Coke, things, then we want the things that are going to rebuild society, right? That's when we get into that. So, and again, we had a blast in 2008. We had a blast buying stuff at the bottom. And I think those trades, I forget the number, it was over the trades we took at the bottom in 2009, March of 2009. I listed, we were on a TV show, and then the next day I did a post, and we listed, I think 15 or so trades that made 300% over the next 6 months. So I mean so in other words, if we took our $2 million and put $1 million into these trades, it would be $4 million 6 months later if the market, and didn't fully recover, it partly recovered, but it doesn't matter when you're that low. And what were the trades? They were like Ford, IBM, Apple, things like that. I wasn't sitting there telling people to buy crazy stuff. Bank of America, that was the stuff we were buying. Things that were absolutely going to be there next year. even though they were being priced like they were going bankrupt. Everything was priced like it was going bankrupt. And seriously, if you weren't trading at the time, if you weren't actively trading back in 2008, you have got to go back and review some of this stuff, because nothing is safe. And that's why you've got to get this religion about hedging, because you have no idea. Like, it didn't matter what the company was. It went down 50, 60, 70, 80%. Didn't matter. Citibank, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, it didn't matter what they did, what they do. It was everything in the market was being sold off like crazy. That's what's going to happen if a nuclear weapon blows up. They will be selling these stocks. And meanwhile, you're like, well, you gotta, and believe me, if it happens, God forbid, I will be writing an article saying, look, they blew up Kiev. 10 million people died, or whatever, 5 million people died, whatever it is. So I'm going to write an article saying, look, they blew up Kiev, 5 million people died. Kiev was 1/10 of 1% of the world economy. If it, will the radiation is going to cause such and such damage, and so on and so forth, and therefore stocks should be down 30%, not 70%. I'll write that article. I wrote that article in 2008. I wrote an article in 2008, and the point I was making at the time, I mean, it was 2009, but people were so panicked that I actually had to write an article saying, look, 30% of the world economy is people in Africa who put a pot on their head and go down to the well and get water and bring it back and pour it out for their cows to drink, and then go back to the well and get more water and come back again, and so on and so forth. And there's a guy with a stick in the field, like hoeing the land and things like that. I said 1/3 of the world economy is subsistence farming and things like that. You can't trade the market as if the entire world is gone. It's not. None of these people who are raised, none of the billions of people who contribute, again, maybe $10,000 to GDP. You figure, these poor people in Nigeria and whatever, they're still doing something. They're still, they're still adding value to the economy. And even if you say it's $5,000, it's 3 billion people times $5,000 is $15 trillion, I think. Amen? Yes, that is correct. So 3 billion people. So remember, that's billions. Wait. Shoot. No. 3 billion people times, what did we just say? $5,000. It's 15. Yeah, 15 trillion. So, and I think it's more like 10,000. I think I worked it out, it was 10,000. So $30 trillion of our $100 trillion GDP. Oh, I know what it was. I'm sorry. I used $5,000 because you have to understand. So 3 billion people of the 8 billion people on Earth, right, are currently, you can't possibly argue that they contribute less than $5,000 to the GDP. Even just feeding themselves and clothing themselves, they're contributing $15 trillion to the GDP. Now, if you assume that the entire Western society is wiped out, we're not all going to die. Now, not dead, though, just economy wiped out, currency wiped out, banking wiped out, okay? You're still going to get up and you're going to learn how to frickin' plow a field, and you're going to learn how to plant potatoes and so on and so forth so you can live. So then all 8 billion of us are contributing $5 billion, $5,000 to the GDP, and now you have a $40 trillion economy. That is 40% of the global GDP if you wipe out everything else. If you are getting up in the morning on a dirt floor and you have no electricity and you have to go and forage for food, you still have a $40 trillion GDP. And at that point, somebody's going to open up a hamburger stand. And that person is going to make $20,000, and somebody else is going to have some sort of makeshift a bicycle place or something like that, so you can get transport. And then somebody's going to open up a little shirt factory and make shirts for people, and a sandal factory to make sandals for people, or whatever. and the economy will be rebuilt. Okay, now it's not likely we're going to be bombed back to the Stone Age or anything like that. But even if you do, you have to understand that the fact that you wake up and breathe and live is gonna put a base on the GDP. So when the market goes in $100 billion economy, when the market drops 80%, you have to say to yourself, that's not possible. And you know what? All these people trying to reestablish the economy in the world and whatever, they're going to need banks. And they're going to need this. And what banks are they going to use? They're going to use the same banks that are already there. They got buildings, they got staff, they know what to do. You know, whatever monetary system we reestablish, we'd have to start using it and have to have an agreed upon thing and so on and so forth. You know, so there's a base, and that's the same thing when we bottom line a company, when we're taking a company and it goes down and down and down, and we say, okay, well, here's the point at which we're going to invest, because we say the same thing. There's some base intrinsic value to most companies. They perform a function, they're there. And unless they're going to get actually killed and be wiped out of existence like Moviephone did, which is one we invested in and doubled down in and blah blah blah, and it still died anyway. So unless it's going to get completely wiped out of existence, it'll come back at some point. It'll find its value, and when it finds its value, we're going to do very well. And that goes to the whole market. So as long as you have a break at a reasonable price, and like I said, if the market drops 50% and we have $2 million still to our name from 3 million now, that's fine. We drop less than the market drop. We drop 33% and the market drop 50%. That's a win. We buy more stuff. Our 50%, our 66% that we have left in a 50% down market means we get to buy 20% more stuff for the same price. With you know, us using all of our money, we get to buy 20% more stock than we had before. And then we just have to pick the right ones. And like I said, the right ones are going to be kind of obvious. After the catastrophe, what is next to what's going to get rebuilt? Some industries will win, some industries will lose. You have to think of what it was. And like I said, in 2008, the economy, you know, things didn't get wiped out. There was no physical damage. People didn't die. That was different than what happened now. People actually died. Millions of people have actually died from COVID. We've actually lost people. In 2008, I said people didn't die. It's an economic catastrophe. People will recover. People will go back to work. People will start doing things again. Because even if they took everything away from you, you still tomorrow are going to get up and you're going to figure out how to live. And so does everybody in the world. In fact, and most people, and frankly, still to this day, most people in the world, that's how they live anyway. Every day they got to get up and figure out how they're going to live till the next day. Billions and billions of people are still living a subsistence life. It's sad, but that's true. It shouldn't be happening, but that's what does happen. And so when people tell you that the market can drop 60%, without an actual nuclear war destroying things, that's bullshit. It's not sustainable because people will get back up and do it again. And you just have to try not to be in the stocks that do nothing. So again, if everything gets wiped out and they start all new companies, we're going to have $2 million to buy new companies with. But that's hedging. And you've got to have the hedges. You've got to have the catastrophic plan. And again, if the short-term portfolio, which is $400,000, if that gets wiped out, the only way that's going to get wiped out is because the long-term portfolio is doing great. So if things go the other way and do well, we may lose $400,000 in the short-term portfolio, but the long-term portfolio will make another $1 million. And we'll be up $600,000, and we'll be in better shape than we were now. Because now we're at 3 million, we have 3.2, 3.5, whatever million. So we're fine if things keep going higher. And again, that's if we lose it all, but we won't because we'll adjust and we'll do what we do. But you know, the market will go higher and we'll be prepared for it. If the market's flat, we're fine with that. And if the market goes down, we're prepared for a catastrophe. Therefore, I can almost go to sleep with these positions. But I'm getting a little more nervous every day. I'm not, this war is just too much. There's too many things that could go wrong between the war and everything else that's happening. You know, raising rates, the war, COVID, supply chain issues still going on, actually getting worse, inflation out of control. Is none of this ever going to matter? It just seems so unrealistic. It's like, how do you just drift by ignoring all this stuff? And again, I said all this crap in 2007, and it took a whole year before the market collapsed. But in 2007, the market was driving me crazy because it went up and up and up, and nobody seemed to care about the housing crisis, about the bank. There were bank failures in Europe. There was one of the banks went down, and there was a housing crisis, and the Greek thing happened. And all that, and I'm just like, how do people not think this is going to affect anything? And then China started falling apart, and I was just like, how can you possibly think this isn't going to matter? And it dragged on so long that I was starting to like buy into it. I'm like, okay, I guess nothing matters. And in fact, that's what I wrote the other day. I put that meatball post up. It just doesn't matter. That's when I started doing it. It was in 2007 when I was like, nothing seems to matter. The market doesn't give a shit. Then all of a sudden, it mattered terribly. And that's what your hedges are for. If you don't have them, you can really leave yourself exposed to something very horrible. So that's where we are. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is. All right, that was my main point for the day that I wanted to make. Oh, and again, we did the short-term portfolio review yesterday. And I don't think we're any different than we were yesterday. Where's yesterday? Oh no, that was money talk. What am I doing? Today was the short-term portfolio day. That is today. Silly me. So we're at 118 now, and this morning we were at 117, so we gained 1% today. Not a big deal. All right, so, and that's without any of these changes put in yet. So we're at 1% for the day. That's nothing. And the key is that we got 433 here, but it's 1.3 million. So we get up to almost $2 million if things fall apart. And not that we want them to, but that's where we'd be. And again, but that's not really true, because while things are falling apart, we would of course be adding to the positions and making more money on the way down. So, you know, the leverage we get on these is usually 3 to 1. We're usually going to get 3 times more money back. So we would set up several hedges where we can triple our money on a major collapse. So once we go down like 20, once these positions get almost in the money, and currently TZA, this spread 30, and that's 150. No, that's not right. This is the 30-60 spread. We're at 35 now, so that's to get to 60, we have to go up 25 divided by 35, right? Is 71%, and then we divide that by 3. That's a 23% drop. So if the Nasdaq drops 20% or 24%, that's when we get to 60. And certainly by that point, we would buy more hedges. And in fact, in TZA, we've already done that. We have this 30-45 spread, right? So now we're at 30. 45 is 50%. 50% divided by 3. So it's 16.66%. So 16-17% drop in the Russell will put us at 45. We already bought a covering spread though, because we have this 40-60 spread. wait, why are those both negative? Oh, I'm sorry. We have a 20-40 spread here that would also be in the money. And then we have this 40-60 spread that would take over at that point. And the point of doing this, by the way, is that when this gets to 40, we can cash out. Now, if we feel that 40 is going to be a top, we would just cash out our longs here and leave this spread covering these short calls, which would only be at the money. And then we've got $20 of upside coverage. Then we could take this money, which would be substantial by then, which would be a good couple of $100,000. And we could take that money and then use that to buy more spreads. So, you know, there's a lot of that goes on. So we roll the money, we do this and that. But the key to it is we take the money that's deeply in the money and we move it and change it and back ourselves up. And then we roll the shorts, as we do with many, many trades. We roll the losing leg and then hopefully work itself out, except for with the hedges, we'd be a lot more careful. But we already have 400 2024s backing this up. So we're in great shape to pull this off. If it hits like $200,000, we're going to be thrilled and take the money off the table. And that would leave us with these 400 covering these short calls, something like that. So, you know, it's because we're balanced, we can make these adjustments, and you can see how easily it was for us to add $300,000-$400,000 worth of additional protection by just making a few little changes, which are not very big changes, actually. So that's our plan right now, and we're sticking to it. And I hope, look, I hope it all comes to nothing. And I don't want to be like a Chicken Little and say the sky is falling and things like that. But again, in 2007, I got many, many examples of me using the Chicken Little reference and saying, look, I'm sorry I have to keep saying this, but I really am bothered by stuff that's going on. And it's not different now. This time is not different. This is a lot of stuff that we should be worried about that the market is not currently being worried about. And a lot of it is manipulation. It's the financial media. And again, in 2008, you have that Jon Stewart video with many, many examples of CNBC telling you how everything is fine while everything is falling apart, telling you over and over again, buy these banks, take this opportunity, jump into the real estate companies. Everything is great. Look at these opportunities, telling you to buy all the shit that their sponsors were selling. And Cramer's Wall Street buddies were selling. And then you have videos of Cramer talking about what a scam it is and how they manipulate, how the hedge fund guys manipulate the media and say things so that the retailers go in and buy stuff so they want to get rid of. And then Cramer is basically running CNBC practically. I mean, he's all over he's on every show and all over the place. And why? Because the sponsors want him there. Why? Because he's a shill for these hedge funds and things. That's why. Because the whole thing is sponsored by people who want this message across, that everything is great. You should be buying stocks. You should be putting your money into Wall Street. You should be investing in financials and blah, blah, blah. There's never a thing saying buy bonds. There's never a thing saying, you know what, you should put your money into real estate. No. Everything is equities. Equities are great. There's always something to buy, according to Cramer. There's always something to buy because, God forbid, you stop buying and their whole sham falls apart. So be careful out there, please, everyone. Okay, this is a very uncertain, dangerous time. Avoid being complacent. Make sure you have an exit strategy. And, you know, look, if you don't feel adequately hedged, let's talk about it in chat and keep having this discussion. I want to raise people's awareness, okay? Until the thing in the Ukraine calms down, I'm not going to be very happy about any sort of complacency, all right? And we'll see how earnings go. That's also going to be very important. In a couple of weeks, the new earnings cycle kicks off, and we'll see what kind of notes we get from the CEOs about how they're handling inflation, what they think of the war, how the supply chain is, so on and so forth. You know, it's a lot of stuff. It's not one thing. It's a pile of stuff that we have to deal with. All right. All right, voice. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll do it again next week. All right, take care.